We grew up in the hood like most black folks. Little did they know it comes gorillas from the south coast, breaking the booze out, living and broken in many pieces. Black rain for not five, explosion posse going to sit with this revolutionary tactic. Them flips up out of my mattress. I practice pro-blackness, not to say I'm prejudice when spinning darkness. No, I'm not suicidal, but I'm dying for my people. No, I'm not arrogant, I distinguish good from evil. I use the world on grounds, align my mind to burn from ignorance. I cut away my perm, I got strong, some can't deal with this mentality. Thinking I'm weak, I'm not no gangster. It won't be televised how many times my posse pull the trigger. Lord, oh Lord, am I the devil too, or am I really the son? To the throne, son, the fuck is true image of you, a portrait that I could not never see. Dumb as I may be, I never go, I kamikaze G, genocide.
Here's your big brother Eric, representing the Panther 48, having massive technical issues at the current point in time, but we're gonna do what we do and push on through. This week, myself, Brother War, more or less, and your big brother Psych, more or less, are honored, extremely honored to have a man that I considered, I don't say a mentor because, and I kind of doubt, Brother Odinga, that you remember me, but I absolutely remember you from back in the days. I used to run with a brother named Brother Gary, and we cross paths and whatnot. I visited you at your home at one point, and I kind of think that it was at that point we shared this commonality of information. And so it was like when I saw all of the newspapers and the books and everything that you had, it was kind of like, yeah, that's what I want to be. That's yeah. So I appreciate that just off the top. You've kind of been in the back of my mind as far as a standard setter for me. I have a lot of newspapers, Final Calls, and Panther newspapers from back in the day that I have. I don't know who's gonna get them once I'm gone, but they're here, you know what I mean? So the information is safe, it's somewhere, it can be found type of scenario. And I know you understand. And I kind of look at you as a M.O.I. big brother type of thing, or that type of, like I said, trendsetter for me. So again, this is Brother Odinga Kambui from residing in Dallas, Texas. I'm guessing you're still there in Dallas, Texas. That's why I knew you.
Sun is out.
So I'm not big on introductions. I'm like Malcolm, keep it simple. So before we get into all the organizations and logistics and who knew what when and history and all that type of thing, if you could, for the masses of the audience, to kind of get to know you a little bit, just give us a little bit of background about where you came from, how you got to, what was maybe the defining moment that sparked that thing and said, nah, I got to do this. I got to, to just click you into this thing we call the movement. And yeah, just basically a little bit of a mini bio, if you would.
Okay. Yeah, I was lucky enough to have the classic kind of upbringing. There was no other direction for me to go. Basically, I'm from Fort Worth, historical Black community, Como, just west of downtown. Yeah, and I wound up in Dallas like before I was a year old, on the south side. Basically, Lincoln High School. And I was there during the time of artists may know Dwayne Thomas. His senior year was my freshman year there. Remember him vividly. Of course, some of the historical people that went there, Abner Haynes and people like that are in the Hall of Fame. So basically, that whole indoctrination thing in the public school system, I was starting to peak that before I had graduated. SNCC had a presence, especially on the south side, where our field secretary here, Ernie McMillan, basically that was the same title that Rap Brown had, in Alabama and Mississippi in that era. Ernie eventually went there himself, but of course, a lot of demonstrations and activity while I was in high school. And I remember one day Ernie and some of the SNCC members had cut across Lincoln's campus, and I was looking out the window, and this was just awestruck me, and I had to find out more about that. So eventually, they were in the news when they had disrupted some grocery store in the neighborhood that was selling like foul products, and Ernie got a case behind that. So eventually, probably about the only somebody in my class that was like, I would have snake written on my sneakers, and being derided for that, and one thing's kind of led to another. So after high school, basically the Black Student Union activity was my next step at a local junior college, and the Black Student Union provided a lot of input to start shaping the growth. And what happened was that winter, my first time hearing about the Panther Party was on the evening news when Fred Hampton was assassinated. And that just sparked all kind of interest in me, because by that time we had one of the activities in the BSU. Brother had brought a Malcolm X last message through, and I think that was before I had a chance to read the autobiography. So the last message was just basically, that just opened everything for me. And with the assassination of Fred in Chicago, luckily I had a relative who I was able to have my aunt send clippings out of the newspaper to kind of keep up with what was transpiring when Fred had got assassinated. So I had just determined before school was out, some kind of way I got to get to Chicago that summer. And basically the ploy was to be allowed to go if I'm looking for a summer job. And it just so happened I arrived in Chicago like the Sunday night before the Monday morning that Bobby Seale was going to be brought in to face those federal charges as part of the Chicago 8 conspiracy trial. Because the trial had already ended with the 7 other defendants, and Bobby was going to be tried solo. And so the mass rally and everything at the federal building was going to be that Monday morning downtown Chicago, and it was a matter of me having to figure out, when I got off the Continental Trailways bus after a day and a half on the road, to study the map overnight and figure out how to get downtown. And so, of course, when I got down there and saw the mass of humanity, on behalf of Chairman Bobby, luckily I was able to talk to the Deputy Minister of Information of the Illinois chapter, Rufus Shaka Walls, to determine where the office was and everything. So that's how I made the connection. And so for the next 2 weeks, basically, my regimen was Panther office, Ellis's bookstore, and that was why I had even taken out the time to put in a job application. So it was like a baptismal for me. At the time, of course, Dallas had no black bookstore. So the bookstore, the Panther office, and that, it was like a 2-week baptismal, basically. And of course, the requirement to attend political education classes, you weren't even allowed to sell the Panther newspaper unless you attended the P classes. So that was a requirement. And just so happened in the class, of course, now mind you, this is only like June of '70. This is like 6 months after Chairman Fred's assassination. So all of the comrades that were in Chairman Fred's apartment had only been back on the street 5 months, because they were all, indicted and charged with attempted murder. And so they had only been on the street for like, a month when I got there. So these were class members that I was, able to talk to, in the PE classes, people like Ronald Doc Satchel, China Doll, brother I just met at the Panther reunion in 2016. I forget his name right now, but hadn't heard any of these people all those years. And I kind of had kept up with him somewhat, because Fred Hampton Jr. had come through here at a local bookstore called Pan African, and had asked him about several that he knew of. And of course, I'd been back to Chicago several times over the years and just had never made any contact, after the fact, with anyone. So I was glad to, most of them were doing well. But, the effects of the raid and the terror that went on there, even today, one of the sisters that was wounded, in the apartment, China Doll, she still walked with a limp. And show you how ironic the connection is with that. During the student rebellion, during that period, like at Bishop College here, one of the student leaders, Kurt Mitchell, his baby sister, of course, was a bosom buddy, a China Doll. So I had already known about that connection. And one time I visited him up there in south suburban of Chicago. We kind of tied up, some loose ends with that. So the whole Chicago thing was like that summer, just basically, and you got to keep in mind the Illinois chapter was the largest chapter in the country. So I couldn't have written the script any more better if I had known all this in advance, not knowing this, before the fact. And of course, we know now, majority, and we saw that in the Illinois chapter, majority of the membership were sisters. And of course, the average age of a Panther was only 19. So mind you, we're going up against the might, the oppressive U.S. government with all these Korean War veterans and all these military experts, on the average having 19-year-olds. So to survive that alone, just speaks of how effective the organizing was. So of course, before the end of the summer, the case in New York, of the New York Panther 21, by midsummer, so they had made bail, and there was a People's Tribunal in Chicago, similar to the one that was in LA with Angela Davis and Jonathan Jackson. Two of the members from the 21 who came to Chicago to speak was Afeni Shakur and Micah Tabor. And of course, at the time, not knowing, Afeni was pregnant with Tupac, him being born to develop the following spring. So of course, I wasn't to find that out till later, and didn't really find out too much later that Tupac's stepmom lives right here in the Dallas area in Bear Creek. Of course, his brother and all his gold records are here on her bedroom wall. So a lot of those connections I've been making. And I've had Makini on several panels with me, dealing with a lot of the history and a lot of the information. And people get to see it up close and personal. So yeah, that whole Chicago thing, it was baptismal for me. And of course, I got wind of there was something going on in Dallas by midsummer, because when Jonathan Jackson and Angela Davis held the People's Tribunal in LA, the Panther newspaper covered it. It had on the centerfold spread pictures of the audience. And I recognized several people in the photo. And I know some members from the Illinois chapter had went to that. So when they got back in town, I'd asked them, did they, meet with anybody from Dallas? They had, but they really didn't remember any names, any particulars. So I was to find out later, that was the individuals who were able to get with Geronimo, and they got to go ahead to establish the National Committee to Combat Fascism. So I wouldn't, really get the scoop on that till I really got back in town late that summer. So that's a whole other direction to cover there, because that preceded, the establishment of the Dallas chapter with Fahim Minka. So if anybody want to just cut in,
that's I knew just from my interaction that you had been very active in the community over a number of years. I guess I didn't get the memo or whatnot that you were actually a member of the party. I knew you, I guess in my mind, I always thought you were like Angela Davis, kind of Panther adjacent, an associate, friendly or whatnot. I didn't realize that you were a member. And I also didn't realize that you were from Como. I'm from Pilot. So, we got beef that, Pilot and Como never really liked each other, so, but that's a Fort Worth thing. We'll work that out later on.
You're from where?
I'm from Pilot in Fort Worth.
I'm reading that for me with Fort Worth. Matter of fact, I've only visited my homestead in Fort Worth twice since I've been grown. Get to look at the house,
really?
To compare it to the picture we had when I was a baby. So yeah, that's been kind of a whole other thing there. So yeah, I had to even look for Como when I went over there the first time.
What part of what I hear, you're not missing anything, having not gone back.
What part of the South? What part of the South are you in?
Well, that's when I say South, sunny South, South Dallas.
Yeah, I already know.
Yeah, that's a common term.
That's where I'm from, South Dallas.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, we were thinking Erykah Badu had kind of coined the phrase for us and make it, a public thing, more widely known.
Yeah, sure indeed.
But yeah, on the childhood growing up thing, but just to touch on the whole childhood thing and the connection. Prior to me starting school, we lived in the Rose Terrace, housing unit, and to prevent me from being a latchkey child, my mom made the wise decision to carry me to Louisiana to live with my maternal grandparents, who were sharecroppers on Glencoe Plantation. And so that was one of the best moves she ever made, because I had what I know now, of course. If I had remained, in the project, that would have been a prescription for a one-way ticket, to Texas Department of Corrections later on. Because, talking to contemporaries of mine over the years, and the life, how they grew up and things that happened to them. So yeah, that would have been bound to happen. So by spending part of my youth in a rural setting like that, being one-on-one with, the growing thing. Well, basically, after I completed first grade, my grandfather transitioned. So I was really only there for a very brief period of time. After that, we moved, 10 miles up the road into another town called Boyce. who, by the way, my first cousin is the mayor of currently. And so really never really got to do the farming thing like, you would have thought, but I got enough of the basics, even over the years going back and forth down there, was able to like do stuff and chime in on that. And it became really an excellent connection with establishing the committee to commemorate the Colfax massacre, because being out, well, the plantation was kind of like about 4 or 5 miles out from town. Colfax, of course, is the parish seat for Grant Parish. And of course, the school bus, when it comes into town, would make like a dog leg right there at the courthouse. And there was, over the years, from like 1951, there was a sign at the courthouse, misrepresenting the massacre that had happened. But no grown-up ever explained that. None of this is in history books. The 150 Black people they're claiming that were killed on the sign, there's no graves in town anywhere, not one headstone anyplace. And so what happened was, one year here at the Malcolm X Festival, I was talking to a radio announcer, Robert Ashley, and because I knew he had went to Grambling, it was from Shreveport, and I asked him, was he aware of the Colfax massacre? And I was showing him some information. The sister that was standing on the other side of him had already been talking to him. And she was overhearing me mention Colfax. And of course, when I got to talking to him, she was asking me, what is it you know about Colfax? So like I was in the first grade there, and trying to make sure Robert, knew about this. It was comparable to what happened in Tulsa. And so she was saying, I'm from Colfax. And once she kind of gave me the parameters, and we were about the same age, lo and behold, we were in first grade together.
Nice.
So we didn't know each other, had no clue, because she lived in town. So, it was rare, I think my uncle would take me into town for like getting haircuts and whatnot, that kind of a thing. But, and any of the class members that lived in town, we almost never saw them. When we hopped on the school bus and went back home, and that was kind of a thing, other than, cousins and relatives. So that was a nice connection with them. So that's how we kind of kicked that off, of us getting curious to start, shedding light on the whole Colfax thing. And we eventually got that to be an annual thing. People were coming. In fact, the first couple of memorial services we did, there were only like one person from the town, from Colfax, attending the memorial, because of the whole fear thing. And that's what that whole sign and all that's always intended to be about. And so, and just so happened, the one brother that attended, the memorial, he happened to be related to Diana. And of course, all of the 150 names on that sign, we have a list of, all of the people, that were killed that day. And of course, what stands out about this case of the Colfax massacre is that it was a Supreme Court case, U.S. v. Cruikshank, and it basically gave a green light to all those elements, Klan and Knights of the White Camellias and all those folks, a green light to resume business as usual. So essentially, that ruling ended Reconstruction. So we're talking less than 10 years after the Emancipation Proclamation went down. So it really stands out there in terms of, the significance of that. And of late, this past June, finally, the hideous sign has come down, because one of the descendants of one of the culprits, he was so ashamed that his, I think it was his grandfather had participated in it. He didn't want his children to be exposed to that. And he started waging a campaign to get the sign removed. Lo and behold, he took it before the city council there. They voted to remove it, all except 2 white men was on there, because they didn't see anything wrong with it. And he wound up forking out the $600 out of his pocket to get the city workers to bring the bulldozers in and snatch it up out the ground. Now, mind you, this is still an attempt to suppress this, because there's no mention of it in the Colfax Chronicle, no mention of it in the Alexandria Town Talk. Because when we first did the first memorial, the Town Talk sent a Black reporter up to town when we did that 2-day teaching thing and the memorial. They covered it. It was front page on the Metro section. And so once the sign is removed, no mention in the Colfax Alexandria Town Talk or the Colfax Chronicle. Well, we saw that it was in the Washington Post, the picture and article and everything. We thought that was a little strange how that made it that far. But most of all of the coverage, when they're dealing with massacres and whatnot, you pretty much hear about Tulsa, but you don't hear about Colfax. So you want to keep. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I was gonna say you likened it to the Tulsa and Black Wall Street, but there's not a lot of information about it. Can you tell us some of the, I guess, the particulars? What was their excuse? You know, which we can probably guess, but you know, how did it play out? You know, give us some history on that if you could.
Well, this is all, you know, post-Civil War and all of the antagonisms and the Klan elements, and you know, how dare, you know, Black people, you know, be visible. And in fact, you had two governments that existed at the time, you know, challenging, you know, and basically to put it in perspective, of course, the courthouse in 1873 was little more than a horse stable. So basically, so yeah, the antagonisms as they, you know, built up, the Black people had put up a makeshift barricade around the courthouse to defend it, you know, with these because of these threats. And of course, the white sheriff, Christopher Columbus Nash, you know, basically one of the ringleaders, you know, of the assault. When they assaulted the courthouse, basically they eventually torched it to flush Black people out, and it is, you know, executed people, summarily executed them as they exited, you know, the courthouse. But there were some survivors. So eventually, when several of the culprits were put on trial in New Orleans, you know, several of these survivors testified, and that's how the case wound up them being convicted. And the white people hiring all of the best attorneys and taking it all the way to the Supreme Court. And the judges basically, the Supreme Court judges basically threw it out, saying this is Louisiana's business, and they weren't going to interfere. So that was a green light to just continue business as usual. So Leanna Keith is a professor, I think she's at Northwestern, that has done a book entitled The Colfax Massacre, dealing with the massacre itself. But for years, I had seen a book, it's a book called The Black Book that makes mention of it in there and has the drawings, you know, them carting bodies off. I had seen over the years. M.O.I used to have a copy of it at Black Images way back in the day. So I had been known about it since I had started researching it. But things along the way got kind of interesting as we would do research on it. Because when we found out they used the cannon to blow away the makeshift barricade, who they borrowed that cannon from were Union officers and brought it up Red River on a steamboat, you know. So they were in conjunction, you know, with them. So that's what they used to blow away the makeshift barricade. And of course, mind you, there's a levee now, you know, between Red River and the town. But back in the day, there was no levee. So a lot of the culprits, as they were, you know, assaulting the courthouse, they could just try to escape on horseback, you know, just going in that direction where the levee is now. So it wasn't until like several years ago that I finally, when I was down there, drove up on the levee, the length of it, to just see where it went to, and kind of get a perspective on it, trying to picture in my mind how that would have looked, you know, prior to them building the levee and everything. But yeah, I would encourage, you know, the populace, if they get a chance to get to tour this area, because there's so much things to do and see. One, they would want to start in the northern part of Louisiana, like about an hour's drive from Shreveport, like northeast of Shreveport, in a town called Haynesville. That's where Chairman Fred Hampton's buried. And for years now, annually, the police has been using his stone for target practice. And so just this past summer, Chairman Fred and Sister Kua, they were down and they have erected a type of protective barrier over the headstone where you can still see it, but it's protected that it can no longer endure any more damage. And so I saw them, they had this, I think it was on Netflix or something, where they had the bulldozers in doing that. So that's one stop on the tour you may want to do. And coming down like a little further south, about the middle way of the state, there's a town called Natchitoches, and that's the oldest settlement in the Louisiana Purchase. You know, that whole French connection thing, and you know, the Haitians saving Louisiana from the French by defeating Napoleon. Well, of course, you know, that large portion of Louisiana was, you know, French control after the Spanish. But Natchitoches, of course, is where Melrose Plantation is located. And of course, one person's made that plantation famous. Well, first of all, I would say, if you going to Louisiana from Texas, and you cross the state line, and you go to the Welcome House, the brochure that you get, it'll show you the most popular tourist attraction in the state is Melrose Plantation. One is known because of Clementine Hunter, a famous painter and quilter that's known all over the world. In fact, at one time, Walmart even sold her prints. And so she's buried there close by at Augustine Church. But yeah, Melrose, of course, what makes it unique is the wife of the plantation owner, of course, was mulatto. So Marie Teresa Coin, looking at her picture, you know, she was like any Black person walking down the streets of, you know, Harlem or Watts, anywhere else. And so that's significant. But I think that the tour hours are really compacted, like noon to 4, something like that. So you might want to check. But just so happened the day we were up there, well, back to the cannon thing at Colfax. When we found out they had used the cannon to blow away the barricade, we went looking for it. And we had read up on the fact that it had been being used as a garden piece at Melrose. So when we stopped by there on our way to Colfax on a trip, it just so happened, we got there too early. The plantation wasn't open yet, but the post office across the street, the person working in the post office was also a docent at the plantation, and she's a direct descendant of Marie Theresa Corn. And she broke it all down to us. So like, yeah, that county used to be here. White dude came and bought it, several years ago. It's back in Colfax. Displayed out on the front lawn of the old McNeely plantation as you come into town. So, I mean, it's like unabashedly, no shame whatsoever.
None.
All the years, I've been passing right by it, because I knew about the McNeely plantation. It's so notorious. I think the weather, maybe within the past 10 years, is just flattened and wore out the slave shacks, out back. And so, passing by there, you would see all of this. So with the cannon, ironically, poised on the front lawn, pointed at the courthouse. So it's like the subliminal message is like, yeah, we ready for you again if you come. And so yeah, when you coming down Highway 8 from Interstate 49, because it's only 10 miles once you get off the interstate to go to Colfax. And so when you get, along where the plantation is, you see McNeely crossing. But you may get confused now because like Little Page is the name of the farm now. And so he married, I think that the deal is he married McNeely's daughter. So it's like it all sounds nice now, like Little Page Farms, you got the big sign up, all of that. And so if you wouldn't know anything about it, you wouldn't have a clue.
Yeah, that's part of their motive, their operation. That's how they do. They change the name up, make it all fluffy. I mean, that's just part of their operation. How they keep things under wrap. But that's crazy.
You can do all this in a day. Matter of fact, if you left here like about 7 o'clock in the morning, well, if you include the visiting the Fred Hampton grave site, it may take more than a day. But if you just only did Natchitoches and Colfax, you could do all that. You could be back here by bedtime. Because like it usually takes me like a little under 5 hours to drive down there. Because the tour thing, you just like an hour and a half at Natchitoches, check all that in. Because Natchitoches is only about a little over an hour, about an hour and a half between Natchitoches and Colfax. And so you can knock all this out. So for people pressed for time and that kind of thing may be a factor. You can do it all in a day. But I would always encourage people, because when Diana lived in Colfax before she moved to Ghana, we would encourage people to just bring their tent and sleeping bag and stuff and camp out on the land that her family has or what my uncle has. And but that was an annual thing also, because she would do like an annual thing with our connection with Cobra, and that tied in perfectly. When some of you all may remember the Gina 6 case, Gina, Louisiana, where the highway, when you're on Interstate 49 from Shreveport, that's the exit you take, Highway 8 in Boyce, and cut across through Colfax, through Pollock, with a federal pen. At one time, Dr. Mutulu Shakur was housed there, and that same highway runs into Gina. So that's like about a little over an hour drive between Colfax and Gina. And we had already plugged into that before it hit the thing nationally with Michael Baisden, because Diana had been driving down there in touch with some of the people that were some of the parents, Gina 6 thing as they met. And because she would always call me, because a certain portion along that road for about like 20, 30 minutes, you don't get a cell phone signal. She would always call me to let me know she said back to Colfax. So I would be, able to contact anybody if they hadn't heard from me in a while. So connection thing with that. And so just so happened, when we all got the entourage together to do the Gina thing, we left here like in the evening, get to Colfax by bedtime. And so by getting there by bedtime, we would get up and at them before the big crowd came up to Michael Basin with the buses. They came in from Alexandria. And so luckily we got there at that intersection before that long line of buses and cars came from that direction, to get down there. I think New Black Panther Party was there at the Gina thing. I think I remember Sierra.
Yeah, we were there. I remember that. That was a huge crowd. That was a big turnout for that event, or not the event, but for that rally. I want to ask you, you mentioned in Cobra, Could you tell us how you got involved with that, kind of what the background of what exactly, because a lot of folks don't know what the purpose of N.B.P.P is, and kind of what is the status of it today? I know there have been a lot of bills. There's, reparations is being introduced by various folks on a national level now. So yeah, if you could give us the actual scoop on what's going on with N.B.P.P.
Yeah, I'm just hopping all over the place here. It's just not necessarily in chronological order, because I didn't touch on the whole Angela Davis Defense Committee when she was facing the gas chamber in California, committed to keep Assata Shakur free. We're having met with Gloria Rolando, who's done the film on Assata. But the whole N.B.P.P thing, of course, is, just been for years, been knowing about that. And it just kind of grew out of when I was on the East Coast. The talk was we need to do something nationally, and they planned the Jericho 98 march on the White House. And so we organized the cadre, a group here, to see if we could muster up some interest and get some folks to go. And it just basically took off. The twins, the sister Lena Pruitt, I forget her sister's name, Charlene. Yeah, Charlene and Lena were like the cogs in that wheel. And it just happened right before one of the Kwanzaa Fest that Commissioner John Wiley Price had coordinated at Fair Park, and we were able to get a table there and had the banner done, and drew a lot of interest on it. And so we wound up taking like a van and a car, to the whole Jericho 98 rally. Of course, Jericho, for those that may not be familiar with it, stands for the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. And of course, that was basically a shot in the arm, for the movement, because it's like the years is kind of almost like was going nowhere with the introduction of H.R. 40 by John Conyers, the congressman out of D.C. They let it just lay there because with no pressure on it, they were just basically ignored. So the whole Jericho movement was to, put a spark to that, and the interest we were generating we felt was really successful. Of course, we had to raise funds, to cover the expenses and whatnot. We did, several fundraisers, leading up to that. And of course, I want to point out this coincided also with Coach Geronimo by then was out. And he was at the Jericho March. Kathleen Cleaver, they had to get up out of there the next day because they went to visit Kwame Ture. He was sick in New York. But yeah, we marched around the White House, and of course, Slick Willie Clinton, he decided to be out of town, that weekend and whatnot. But children of the Move 9. A lot of their children were there. I think Caesar Change was the group name they performed. In fact, you can go online. I think it's in like a 5-part series that is broken down. You can, unless they've snatched it, you can see the whole Jericho March, the rally we had at Malcolm X Park, leading up to the march. And of course, probably only maybe by 15-20%, of the people at that march, of course, were Black, because of course they both could take out work during a work day. But of course, if you do it on the weekend, of course, all the government offices are shut down and hardly has any effect.
Yeah,
so that was timely. So the whole N.B.P.P thing. So N.B.P.P basically, locally, the most recent activity that's went on is the annual tribute to the ancestors we do here at Freedman Cemetery, of course, here in Dallas, and that was like Saturday. Yeah. So yeah, I think it was Friday night or Saturday night. I was at the homecoming thing that Malik Zulu, Shabazz and them did, last night, dealing with that. So yeah, that pretty much. So the archived documents, the video and all that stuff over the years. Sister Marilyn Clark, who's with the South Dallas Cultural Center, has all that archived, and the Third Eye materials and all of that stuff. So we pretty much got it. And we have documented a lot of the individuals that were involved in this movement by Professor Marvin Delaney, who used to one time was at UT Arlington. He set us all down and got our individual stories and documented it. And so it's not like it's out in the stratosphere somewhere. We have access to it. But the documents, the original materials, I'm basically it in Dallas, able to come and do exhibits, displays, a lot of video footage. I'm in the process of, since I rarely get demand for this, just had been an urgency to get it converted, digitized, a lot of the VHS and the CD thing. So that's one of the goals, to preserve a lot of that, because a lot of stuff I'm realizing now that I have, didn't realize the significance of it back, once upon a time. Like I was somewhat, what example would be, I had been familiar with the sister out of Cambridge, Maryland, that were part of organizing the resistance up there, because Malcolm X had mentioned her on his last message. But lo and behold, there's a VHS where she was on Villanova show in New York with Dr. Professor Leonard Jeffries and brother that was with Wilmington 10, Ben Chavis, on a panel. Of course, there's a book out now, The Strength is Eternal, that iconic picture of her, walking past the big National Guards people with the rifle with the bayonets, and she's shoving it out of her face. So I would highly recommend that. Also, what I'm currently finishing up on is Charles Cobb's book. He was one of SNCC's field secretaries in Mississippi and Alabama. His book is This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed. And he gives a blow-by-blow to the movement. You definitely need to kind of pick up on that. And he deals with a lot of Carfax thing on that. And the connection, of course, is with the founding of the Deacons for Defense. So how important their involvement was. Starting in Jonesboro, in the next chapter, Jonesboro, of course, is in the northern part of Louisiana, and Bogalusa is down close to New Orleans. And so that whole armed self-defense part of that thing, the SNCC whole leadership had a problem with addressing. Of course, they were guarded most of the time. And some of the Eyes on the Prize scenes, you kind of see them, and I think one of the brothers was being interviewed because they were asking them what kind of weapons did they have, whatnot. But yeah, they were there in Mississippi and in places, and without them, most of those, efforts at voter registration, people had just been massacred. Because the Klan was just routinely, riot in, like on a particular day, they would register people to vote. That very night, the Klan would ride through the community as an intimidation thing. So they may be registered, but they better not dare come and vote. Was the response to that. And so without the armed resistance, there would really been no, voter success. Any of that thing. And what you see Fanduel Hamer discussing, on the Eyes on the Prize, that ain't the half of it. I mean, the terror that they endured, this was amazing. If you think Fanduel Hamer was tough, or you need to read about her mom, and stuff that they stood up to. So yeah, lo and behold, who am I, like shy away from the challenge, and looking back on it, because the question I get oft times is, if you had to do all this over again, would you do all this, My thing would be like, I'd have to figure out a way to be more intense.
Yeah. I know the feeling. I really do. That would be very much my response. Is, yeah, I would do it again, but I need to do it at a higher level. I need to be more about it some kind of way. Absolutely. I wanted to ask you, a lot of folks on the outside looking in at the Panther Party and all of that, all that they're aware of a lot of times is just guns, people in black carrying guns. And to them, that was the party. But those of us who are part of it, have been around it, know that the most essential part of any chapter of the party in general was always the programs. So I'm curious to hear about, what types of programs did the Dallas chapter have back in the day? What kind of things was it? Food programs? Was it reading programs? What kind of things were the cats able to get up and moving there in Dallas during that time?
Okay, well, keep in mind, I've never even worked with Raheem in the Dallas chapter. See, we proceeded the Dallas chapter with the National Committee to Combat Fascism from the winter of 70 to spring of 71, when it was found out that the very person that they had over it was agent provocateur Curtis Gaines. And so that was like February 71. So it was in shambles. Basically, when I got back from Chicago, it was already in shambles, because I brought back newspapers to sell, and being downtown that particular weekend selling the papers, people were coming up to me and asking, well, where were you all last week? And I was just totally puzzled, didn't know what was going on. So basically, they had already screwed up, their paper account. They weren't even selling the paper anymore. And really? So, of course, whenever you popped it, when I went over to the office, of course, our office is located over on Pennsylvania and 2nd Avenue. Of course, now looking for that, you wouldn't find it because that's inside of the boundaries of Fair Park now. And the house, of course, we use as the office was owned by J.B. Jackson. Connection with that is J.B. Jackson, of course, was a classmate of MLK at Morehouse. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting connection. So that was very, very brief, stint with that whole thing. But like I said, most of my time had been spent in Illinois Chapel. Now I really can't even think of a program because, like I said, they didn't even have the newspaper to conduct the PE classes. It required a newspaper. And so basically I had to do that on my own because when I was pointing out things I had to, in other words, what I saw here ain't what I saw in Chicago. So I already knew, they hadn't begun to establish, what you need to be doing. And so when I would bring this up, of course, the usual retort is, well, why won't you do it? And so I said, well, I guess if it's gonna happen, I'd have to do it. And so I became basically the person, the minister of information, and out of my pocket, to acquire the newspapers. And of course, the sabotage going on with the contract program and everything at the time, the newspapers being, sabotaged. There was, ride soaking wet around the country, various chapters. And so in order to get the newspaper to be assured of getting them, you had to pay the additional expense of having them air freighted. So that required me, and at the time I was living in Oak Cliff, that required me to take 2 buses to Love Field every Saturday to pick up the papers at Brandon Air Freight. Then bus back to Oak Cliff. If I didn't sell them all, like at the Lancaster Key Shopping Center, I didn't sell, I basically had to eat. And of course, the handful that I kept to use in the PE class. So that went on for like several weeks. And basically, really wasn't that much enthusiasm because this is just foreign. So most people like sitting in there. And once in a while, like Curtis Gaines and his entourage would, stop by the office and, try to quiz me like I didn't know what I was doing. They asked me like, who's somebody on the national level, what's their name, kind of a thing, And a lot of these people had come through Chicago that summer. So I was kind of familiar with them, like Big Man Howard, who had been the Minister of Information with the newspaper in Oakland. He had come through, and he and Bobby Rush was on a TV program one night. And so people like that had come through, during the summer. So I was kind of familiar with people on the national level, somewhat. And so that passed muster. It couldn't really trip me up on that. So as people attending the class kind of knew, I knew what I was talking about. So eventually, like I said, by February, when the information came out, that Curtis Gaines was agent provocateur, and how that came out, by the way, was
is what that's what I was about to ask you. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around the guy that was in charge of the chapter was working for the feds. Mm-hmm. That's crazy to me. Okay. I can't. I'm having trouble wrapping my mind around having that be a reality. Like that would just, I don't know. I don't know what that would do.
Well, keep in mind, back in the day, there was no intense screening process, well, even if it had been, what would you do? Somebody walk in the front door, say, are you a pig? They're gonna say no, so hey, the situation in Chicago with O'Neill before I got there. He rose through the ranks to become, right-hand man for Chairman Freed. Laid out all of the diagram of the apartment, had been forced into what he was doing because when he was a youngster, he got caught with a stolen car driving across state lines, and the FBI gonna give him a chance to work this case off. So that's how he got, thrust in that position. But of course, what determined whether or not people were in those positions, by having a cadre of people you were familiar with, kind of would eliminate that. And so what I observed on a daily basis was, if anybody was, a provocateur or whatnot in Chicago, they did the same work everybody else was doing. So I really wouldn't have seen part of that advantage they would have had. Well, basically, what they would have been reporting on, you could have read in the Panther newspaper. Because I've seen over the years when they were compiling documents, FBI documents have come out through the Freedom of Information Act. They've had stuff in there like they would have a chart of Panther leadership from Huey on down. And so we published that in the newspaper. So you could have got that for 25 cents. So all the hundreds of thousands of dollars they spent, on surveillance and, all that kind of stuff, just all the more ludicrous now. So basically the connection with the local thing with Curtis Gaines was that when they were expelled, they morphed into something resembling the party with an office down on Warren Avenue off of Oakland Avenue, which is now Malcolm X. And so, but of course the public would have had no way of knowing that. So what we were able to do, well, let me say, there was a brother here who had been in the Dallas chapter. He had been like in SNCC with Curtis and Fahim and all of them back in the day. And so, but he had moved on to California. In fact, he was assistant to David Hilliard. He resembled David Hilliard quite a bit. I'm sure that had a lot to do with that. So he submitted the article in the Panther newspaper, February 17, 1971, explaining all of what happened and listing Curtis Gaines, his wife Beverly, Cornelius Jackson, and Red Dog Lister. And so they were able to get that to Alva Johnson at Channel 8 News. And that was broadcast on the local evening news. So that kind of blew the cover off of that and exposed it. So that kind of, that was a dead in the water thing with that. So from that point on, it was just a facade dealing with the whole Curtis thing. And so this was like 71. So of course, in between that period and Fahim going out to California, getting a charter to establish a chapter, Angela Davis' situation had come up trial. Because see, the whole thing with Jonathan at the courthouse in August of 70, by the time Angela was apprehended a year later, and the trial, got in the way, it's like after 71. So I spearheaded the Angela Davis Defense Committee. To shorten the story, when Angela was acquitted, of course, the first stop on her tour was Dallas, here at the Sheraton. It just so happened our connection at the time was good enough for her whole speech that night was taped and played the very next morning on KKDA radio, which just blew us away. This had never happened before. That was kind of amazing. But yeah, I was able to, they had sent the advanced team in here, discussing security and whatnot, and so that was an experience. And so by the time Fahim, decided to, because I think Marvin Crenshaw, who had come down from Minnesota, had encouraged Fahim to get the chapter. And of course, he had to get to California to do the orientation and all that stuff for a while. And of course, the reason I never worked with him because didn't trust him. Crenshaw brought him to me to get the airline ticket to go to Oakland with the promise he'd repay me. And of course, to this day, haven't seen a penny. And I just informed Oakland that at such time, I would choose not to, go that route. And so Crenshaw, Hillman, and a lot of other people, lesser known people I'm not that really familiar with, they deal with the Dallas chapter. So yeah, that would be some of the folks that would deal with that. But there was also another group, it was a spinoff from our NCCF, and that was Leroy Haynes, who was expelled from El Centro, and they went on to North Texas State in Denton. So he and Skip Shockley and Bernie Smitty and some comrades out of Beaumont, and they formed the North Texas chapter there in the Moore Housing Project. And so that was effective for a while. Skip Shockley details a lot of that in his book, Mother's Son, where he covers a lot of what that organizing entailed. Of course, Skip has going on to join the Ancestors in the past year, and Hillman within the past like 3 or 4 months. We had a homegoing for him. So yeah, that's been the local connection with the Dallas chapter. And well, like I say, Maryland probably has a lot of, if they've interviewed Fahim with his details of whatnot at the South Dallas Cultural Center archives. And of course, we have the archives for the party itself is out in Sacramento. Billy Jennings, who was at one time Huey bodyguard. And funny story about BJ. Of course, BJ went to the same high school out in San Jose area that Tommy Smith attended. And so he's always telling us that, when the Central Committee had chosen him to be one of the bodyguards, he said, like, if anything happened to Huey, it better happen to you first. I said, whoa, yeah, that's some serious
Yeah.
Just give you some idea. But they were always serious from the jump. The six original Panthers, it's just known that he would get everybody's contact information when they go out on the police alert patrols, because you may not be coming home that night.
Yeah.
So that was the signal of how serious that was.
So did I hear you right? There was a chapter in Denton?
Yeah, it's listed. You know, definitely, it's North Texas. You know, it's the category it's in. So
I did not know that.
yeah, so that's what, you know, like most of it. And it had program like I know they had like a breakfast program, you know, in the housing unit, and maybe some others. But yeah, it was very effective because they would come down here periodically, you know, and I would meet with them. But you know, that members like Skip Shockley, they kind of grew out of the second wave of the Black Student Union after us, because I think they were called like SOUL. I think we were SOUL and they were BSPI, Black Students for Positive Identification, what they were at El Centro, and so that was who they became. So yeah, it gets kind of convoluted if you don't really have it in chronological order. But yeah, so when the NCCF head Curtis Gaines expelled, like they went on to Denton, and for that lull period of time, I had to figure out, you know, where was rent money coming from, that kind of a thing. So for a while, that kind of went on. And then when the Angela Davis thing popped in, you know, I was able to coordinate, you know, a lot of that. So a lot of things you were able to do without a lot of funds. You'd be amazed before the modern technology kicked in, because, you know, to be able to effectively deal with the Angela Davis committee, you know, unless you really had a kind of a beat on what was going on daily out with the trial and everything, you really wouldn't know any more than the general public would know, so they really wouldn't have any use for you. So how we were able to keep up every day with what was transpiring during the trial is we figured out how to use the long distance phone free at the payphones. And so I'd be on the phone like the person like Rob Baker, who was coordinator of the San Francisco office of Perfect This Committee. You know, we'd have him on the phone at least once a week, about an hour and a half, taping the conversation. Then we could play it at our meeting, you know, bring everybody up to date and whatnot. But one other incident during the whole Angela thing was Diane Ragsdale, you know, was over the NAACP chapter on, I think she was at TWU campus. They had invited me up because we sponsored a film showing. And to this day, I don't know if you can get your hands on this film or not, but it's called Portrait of a Revolutionary. It deals with Angela. And we scheduled a showing at the old Crest Theater there in Oak Cliff. And we were gonna show it at North Texas. And Dan Ragsdale had coordinated all of that. And so got on campus, they had sabotaged the projector. So we were never able to show the film up there. And it, you know, took me in for questioning and whatnot, and, you know, just asking all dumb, silly questions. And when they finally called a lawyer in, they had no more questions, you know, to ask at the time. And so yeah, that was really a interesting little scenario when we had that film and you were trying to get it shown around. But of all the films over the years I've seen, for some reason, that one just doesn't seem to, it just vanished, you know. I don't know whatever happened to it. I don't know if they digitized it to this day, but people have asked, it been at various conferences and events around the country, you know, I've asked people about it. Either they'd never seen it, or they have no clue where it is now.
I got the name of it now, so I'm on it. I'm gonna look around for it. If I find it, I'm definitely gonna get it in your hand. You know, that's kind of that's my claim to fame as an M.O.I. as I find stuff that folks can't find, coming up with something somewhere, you know, that sort of thing. So Portrait of a Revolutionary, I'm gonna be all over that looking for that. You threw out some names. Some of them I recognized, some of them I didn't, but I want to kind of do the same thing to you, you know, throw you some names and I'm not looking for dirt or any nonsense like that, but just, you know, your experience, what you knew them to be doing, involved in during your time period, and what your connection with them was. And the first name I want to throw out is Asher Kwesi. I think I forget where he came from, or
LA. Well, he's from the East Coast, but
okay.
When I met him, he was in LA. Strange how all this came to be. The connection with Kwesi and I is Dr. Joseph Ben Yakanan, you know, the late, you know, sage from Ethiopia, you know, professor at Cornell one time, and so we had heard, well, what happened was I caught a split second of Dr. Ben on PBS, and he was so profound, that little short clip I saw, the curiosity got to be where, when I mentioned him to someone, then the next thing we knew, he was coming here to speak at UT Arlington. apparently Professor Delaney had a connection and knew him. And so that night he was at UT Arlington. The thing that struck me wasn't so much what he was saying, because it was over my head at the time, was the white people in the audience, all the students, they weren't acting a fool like they normally do, challenging him on stuff. Nobody had any questions challenging anything. I said, well, damn, that's strange. Luckily, I had taped it on cassette, to really play it back when I got home, to kind of digest a lot of what he was saying. Right. And so that's the first thing that struck me about it. That's really fucking, they usually just go off. Because a lot of stuff he was saying, like it sounded outlandish, and they didn't question nothing or challenge anything. And so I said, wow, that's interesting there. So then the next thing I'm hearing, he's going to be in Houston, and the Sister Ada Edwards with the Shrine, she's connected to the Shrine in later years. She had a black bookstore in Houston, down the street from KCOH Radio on Alameda, Jewel Corporation, JUA. And what it was, the books Doc Ben was mentioning, I don't think Black Images, either they hadn't been in business that long, or I know they didn't have a book. And so Bandela, of course, one of the founders of Pan-African Connection, we drove down because he knew Sister Ada, because I think she had been connected with the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and she knew Kwame Ture. And so we went down there looking expressly for, Doc Ben had mentioned the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and among others. But all of the books he had mentioned in his lecture at UT Arlington, he didn't mention any books that he had written, So coming away from that lecture, you wouldn't have known he had written anything. And so when we got there, looking for the Book of the Dead and other books, start seeing his name on books, so like, whoa, didn't know he had written all this. And so I'm trying to think of how, so that next spring, that next summer, I would like every other summer, so I would drive to LA. Because a friend of mine who had been here at the Black Student Union at Bishop College had got kicked out of school for organizing, student organizing. And Bernard, I would visit him, in LA. And so he didn't live that far from the Aquarium bookstore. Now, it was middle of the week when I was there. So apparently, when we were in fact, I went there looking for one of Doc Ben's books, Black Man of the Nile. And so leaving the bookstore, I saw this flyer. Didn't notice it, paying attention to it when we were walking in. But the flyer was indicating the part 2 of the lecture was going to be that Thursday by Asher Kwesi. And I said, and he had mentioned Doc Ben name was on the flyer. I said, this dude must have some connection with Doc Ben. We may want to check him out. So lo and behold, we go check him out at the Aquarium. And I talked to him afterwards and told him I was from Dallas, and what it take to get him to Dallas. I said, oh no, just hey, figure out a way to get us there, and no charge, no nothing. So hey, as soon as I got back here, I got busy on that. So that was like in 1983. Couldn't interest anybody in bringing him. So luckily at the time, I still had American Airlines credit card, and arranged with M.O.I at Black Images and Glover at SMU. So those were the 2 locations we had set up to have him, do the presentations at. But what happened was, it was the weekend of a homecoming at SMU, so there wasn't hardly any turnout there with Glover. And so the Sunday, we did it over at the MLK Center Library. Apparently, the presentation he had done at SMU, word had got around. So that next Sunday, we couldn't even get all the folks in the little library over there. Wow. We were jam-packed. Yeah, and so that was the kickoff of the connection with that. And so, of course, a couple of years later, so he winds up marrying the daughter of one of the school board members here, Mr. Price. And that's an interesting thing there. So, of course, they do presentations now where he does his, and she does the sisters' angle of it, and the back and forth trips that they take with everybody. Yeah. So yeah, I would encourage people to plug into that, Kemet New Productions, and go online and check out their site, because they do the pilgrimages and the tours to the Nile Valley and Ethiopia and other places. And unlike your regular store-bought tours that you're not going to learn anything on, because we were able to observe that firsthand when we went in the Nile Valley in '87. And we would be at a temple. We would be like listening in to the tour guide explaining to the white tourists what the temples and things were about. they weren't learning nothing. They were just basically looking at some rocks and dust. They would come away with. And the curiosity was they were observing us, but they would see us conducting like the libations and the incense and stuff. And they were really curious. They were like walking away from what they were supposed to be becoming where we were. Especially when we were Isis temple. That was really a nice little session. But a lot of that, kind of tied in. And so next thing I hear, I guess with all the earthquakes in LA, Quasi has moved here and married a sister, and so he's been here ever since. But the ironic twist of this is it almost seemed like he was in here more when he was living in LA than he is since he's been living here. This is the least of the places that the sister sufficient with the act of change. Has had him a few times over there, but most of his presentations, elsewhere, besides Dallas. And so, but I do a presentation on the Nile Valley based on that trip also, and so you're available for that. And I tie in the whole, scheme of things with the origin of the party, and but even before I do the party, presentation, I'm available to do that whole the African origin of civilization. To tie in with the thing, because with the panther being in Tutankhamun's tomb, him striding on top of it, and we see the panther on the side of the black battalion in World War II, and all that good stuff. And of course, brother that founded the Kansas City, Missouri chapter, Pete O'Neill, that's in exile in Tanzania. He had a panther tattooed on his leg way back in the 50s, and so a lot of that was the forerunner to a lot of stuff, and so. So it's the history is so rich, and you'd never. I mean, a lot of times, matter of fact, when we were in the Nile Valley at the conference in Aswan, of course we were staying at the same hotel that Dr. John Clark. Oftentimes we would share a cab back to the hotel with him. That was like sitting at the feet of the master, just a cab ride, getting a whole 4-year college degree, just listening to him. Like our lips were still shut, him just running stuff down. And so, so a lot of, lo and behold, like a lot of stuff is available now, just Google it up and, get the whole lectures and whatnot. Because you definitely want to check out this video for Doc Ben and his cohort, Professor Joyce Simmons, is on a panel at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, where the moderator is sitting in the middle. And it just blows it away. It's an hour long. It's like one of them quickies. You can just get everything. In that.
I've seen. I saw Asher's a couple of times, and I've seen several videos. I never got to go on the tour to Kemet. I always wanted to, never got to, or haven't yet. But he was always fiery in his speeches and his passion. But when I would see him on the videos at the actual sites in Kemet, it was a whole different level to his I don't know, his intensity. It was just notched up a lot. So I was always just, you could just feel, it was almost palpable how impassioned he was or is about that information. So I can imagine people wandering away from what they're doing to just getting real information. I mean, that just sends goosebumps. It's got to. I want to throw out one other name real quick and kind of get any insight you have on Al Lipscomb.
Yeah. Well, of course, I've studied a lot about Al, since his demise, because way before my time. But just so happened he went to the same high school I went to way back in the day, and at Fair Park, that's the African American Museum, and it shows the history of the short North Dallas area where Freedman Cemetery is, and they have a map of all those businesses the Black people owned back in the day. And I never knew that was a Lipscomb grocery store, there in the hood in short North Dallas, over by Lemon and Hall in that area. Because Central Expressway that runs from downtown Dallas to Oklahoma, basically is split in half a historical Black community, known as Freedman's Town, in light of the Blacks coming out of the emancipation thing. And of course, on the west side is the cemetery, but of course, it just so happened, my homeroom teacher, the whole 5 years I was at Lincoln, his son is narrating that short film clip that's companies that exhibit this in the museum, because he played amongst the tombstones in the cemetery when he was a little boy. Because he's widely known locally. He was a gynecologist here in South Dallas, Robert Prince Jr. But yeah, that whole bodies being under some, in fact, even today, when they dug up the Midway for the expressway, they just turned the bodies on this bodies on the Central Expressway now, and so not including the ones they had to reinter, in Freedom Cemetery and whatnot. So a lot of history. So that's why I was mentioning earlier about N.B.P.P was a part of them doing the annual memorial thing Friday night over at the Freedmen's Cemetery. That's a connection with that. So yeah, Lip has been the quote rabble rouser at City Hall over the years, and he took Diane, Rags under his wing, and at one time they were both on the city council. And I don't know if you all can find, Google up and find out where they're rapping this tune. I forget the name of it, but it was real catchy at the time they had it out. But that just kind of knocked us out. Just didn't become of them at all. Something I'm trying to say, or something like that, how it meant. But yeah, that you find it real humorous. But yeah, eventually, they efforts to get out off the soapbox, put a case on him, and when they put him on trial, they did a change of venue way out in West Texas. And there I did the old go limp thing. He was sick, and they had to, redo the whole thing and whatnot. So, most of the senators, as far as I know, they're still around. I saw some of them in one of the activists, Roy Williams, is homegrown over at Hall Estate in Fair Park. And so his wife, she was there. But other than just kind of being in the movement kind of a thing, just really didn't know him personally, or for that matter, a lot of people that even I know that been around in the movement just really don't know them personally. That's one of the responses that I've heard Asada give when she was being interviewed about things that were shortcomings of the movement. People just really never got a chance to know each other, socializing, because I guess they were busy working. Just really never got to know a lot of folks. So a lot of people I see now, I just kind of remember their face being involved and couldn't, they probably couldn't tell you my name, I couldn't tell you theirs, and just kind of know they were involved in some stuff. Cause like that, if I don't go to like Pan African in a month or two, I wouldn't see folks. So if I'm gonna see them, that's probably where I'll see them at. We do. Yeah, that's a Sunday drum circle, and I usually try to make that at least a couple of times a month. Deal with that to keep on it. So yes. But otherwise, just especially with the whole virus thing now, that's the perfect excuse to keep folks apart and not really socialize through some things. So, but yeah, the icon here, Mama Mac, her funeral, was like last month. So that's Ernie Macmillan's mom, and she was a forerunner of a lot of his activity, back in the day. And of course, we lost the last of the civil rights twins, Ina Daniels. She passed also. Of course, she was married to the movie actor. I forget his first name, but of course his last name McGee. He played in the Book of Numbers with Philip Michael Thomas and Peter Payne back in the day, which they filmed here in Dallas. And of course, their daughter has been working on a project for several years dealing with one of the Panther 21. I'm trying to think of his name too hard. A brother from Decatur, Texas. Sundiata. Yeah, she's working on Sundiata. So yeah, you get to try to tie all these loose ends in and put them in chronological order. And but yeah, Lip had basically Lip spawned John Wiley Price.
Okay, so John Wiley, what did you have any interaction? Did you see anything that he was doing in the community, or what was your experience like with him?
Yeah, well, believe it or not, we were at El Centro together. Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we're the same age. So yeah, we were so we kind of spun off of that, and so when he got his connection with KKDA, that's how we were able to get on there so much, especially when we were promoting the whole Jericho thing. We had like an open door, just coming in anytime to promote that and a lot of things. And of course, with him having protested the racist broadcasts or TV stations and doing the protests and whatnot. And that's kind of how the Warriors formed. And out of that, of course, we spun the New Black Panther Party with Eric Michaels. That's kind of how I already knew everybody. And so it wasn't like a hostile thing like with some former members that primarily had been with Fahim, antagonistic, especially later on when they brought in Khalid Muhammad. So when they had the press conference, denouncing it, and I'm like, well, who's going to mediate this? Pigs don't care who's who anyway, kind of a thing. So I just kind of found it amusing and kind of wrote a position paper on that. So yeah, that kind of the connection, how that was. But yeah, but again, just really just didn't know that much about it personally. Just knew it from El Centro, and when after we had done the first annual Kwanzaa Fest, it was a one-day thing at Lincoln in the auditorium, and we quickly realized it outgrew it the very first time. We had the next one at Fair Park in the Automobile Building, and it just kind of took off from there. And people kind of confused it with Kwanzaa, which we had to clarify oftentimes. And so it didn't take place last year. Of course, with the virus thing, that was one of the other things that didn't happen. So, in fact, even the longest running cultural program here at Harambe Festival, it's gotten so to where now, for the second time, I've missed it because when I went up there Saturday, I didn't see anybody where they normally have it out on the west side parking lot. I just seeing them posting now where it was going to be over on the east side. Unless you just knew it was over there, you wouldn't have even, seen it. So I said, wow, it's come to that.
What was because you mentioned the New Black Panther Party, and I don't know if you may or may not know, myself, War, and Psych, I guess is having technical difficulties, kind of dropped off a while ago. We all kind of came up through the N.B.P.P with Aaron and Khalid and all of that was going on. What is your take on the era just prior to like the early to mid 80s up through the beginnings of the N.B.P.P? What were you seeing going on? What was your take? What was the energy? What types of things were the Pigs doing or other organizations as far as our people were concerned? Just kind of reminisce a little bit and share with us what you were seeing going on.
Just a lot of things kind of meshed. A lot of people that were involved in one thing were involved in other things. I'm sure it was difficult to distinguish, one from the other. So these things kind of evolved, like I said, as the Warriors became the nucleus, for what was being called the New Black Panther Party. We had to make a clear distinction that it wasn't us, from Oakland continuing this. We had to make a clear distinction on that. And of course, one reason I had no problem with it was I had researched the history of the original party, how they had the connection with the folks in Alabama, with the Lowndes County group. And knowing now that Mark Comfort out of the Bay Area had went down and met with, some of the individuals there, and and Huey and Bobby, they had gotten the approval to use the symbol and whatnot, and so there was no problem with that. Like I said, in one of Bobby's early speeches, I remember him saying, as long as there's one black person in the world, there will be a Black Panther Party. And so that was basically my position, But of course, being careful not to distort the legacy, of course, was uppermost in folks' mind, like Fahim and them, when they were bristling and had the antagonism. So the activity basically was, just day-to-day struggle, and really nothing in particular I'm trying to place was anything locally afloat, other than just going like the bookstores. I think they had started the book club there at Black Images with Emma, and a lot of things kind of spun off from that, and that was kind of a nucleus where people kind of gathered at. So around that, so as events took place with the protests at the TV stations, and that got a lot of press coverage, and incidents happened when I think one white lady tried to run over John on the picket line one day, and he reached over and bent her windshield wiper, and a big case came out of that, and the billboard thing whitewashed, and so this one thing just led to another, and the cases that were popping up, we saw a similarity with that from back in the day. Because, when you look at the list of charges in Panther space, like in Chicago, for example, we see cases where people were arrested and got cases for spitting on the sidewalk. So stuff as ludicrous as that. And so that, yeah. So yeah, that whole thing with John deciding to take the fall for painting, whitewashing the billboard so nobody else would go to jail, and that whole thing with the windshield wiper, this woman wasn't charged with felony assault with a vehicle, amazes me to this day, when been in the wiper is the case. So with the publicity around that, and of course they were picketing, I think the substation, I don't know, it was Highway, for a period of time. Because I know Diana was a part of that. Of course, she would go to work in the morning. And I think we did the substation out here in Pleasant Grove a couple of times when the Black Police Association was being discriminated against, and so it's all these numerous, involvements in things, and trying to kind of keep them in perspective. And so as time has gone on, you just kind of just peel back the onion, and the list just grows and grows. And the people that say, well, let me just say too, I don't recall the party ever keeping, a list of membership. So over the years, once it got kind of safe for people to say they were in the Panther Party, we would just have a set of questions to ask them, because they didn't know certain things. We knew to whatever degree they were involved. They couldn't have been that involved, because this basic stuff you would know without even being involved in the party. So yeah, this stuff like, could you just kind of share with us a couple of points of the 10-point program, that kind of a thing. Could you name a couple of the members on the central committee, some of the organizers and stuff like that. So they didn't have a clue, about who folks were. I just said, well, what chapter were you involved with? Because, surely you would have to have known some of that. And definitely specific cases that went down. So things that hit the national news, like the Panther 21 case, the whole thing with Jonathan at the courthouse in San Rafael, the Angela case, spun from that. So just little stuff like that, and trying to get an understanding, because to this day, we still have confusion out there with people still think that Assata Shakur is Tupac's mom. They think that Carl Hampton in Houston is related to Fred Hampton in Chicago. I hear it on the radio even recently. I've got to, send in stuff to do corrections on. And I just tell people, you can find any documentation anywhere, because luckily, people are still living that were involved in this. So you do talk to them. Like one person that coordinates a lot of the archivists and the legacy information is Bunchy Creer in Houston. In fact, he and James Aaron came up with Skip's funeral. And of course, James Aaron at 18 took over the People's Party #2 in Houston when Carl was assassinated, became the Houston chapter. The brother that was the head of that was 18-year-old James Aaron. Of course, Bunchy had spent a lot of time in Oakland at the time, and so he's now one of the archivists and deal with the legacy from the Houston perspective and history, and Steve Edwards and people like that down there. So people are still around that can clarify stuff and folks need to know, and not really sure about some things.
Well, I have a quick side note, kind of, sort of. You mentioned a name down in Houston, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
Was it?
Bunchy Creer, James Aaron. Yeah, they were all in the Houston chapter. Boko Freeman.
What was the last name? Bunchy Creer?
Creer, Crear.
Yo, that's my last name. And I
wow.
think
John Creer.
Huh?
John Creer. Yeah, we call it Bunchy.
Okay, John. See, I came across somebody in Houston with the last name of Creer, and had my daughter try to reach out through Facebook, because I don't have a Facebook account. Try to get her to kind of reach out, but I'm gonna try that again, and maybe I'll drop your name, and maybe they'll respond this time, and we can make a connection. Because I know one thing that I've gotten out of just our interaction this evening is how interconnected all of this is. The fact that we're sitting here talking to a man who's connected to Chicago, California, Louisiana, went to high school with people that are, I don't want to say famous, but are names. All of these names that pop up, and how in the past, when kindergarten or first grade together, or high school, and all of that sort of thing. So it's really driving home that idea that all of this is so interconnected. So I'm definitely, that just makes me, I need to try to reach out to them again and see what type of dialogue, because there's no reason that with having the same last name and being a part of the same type of movement, there's no reason we shouldn't be interacting on some level.
Yeah,
So
I'm sure. I lost my phone about a month ago, and when I, replaced it, I was able to get the list of my numbers. I think I probably still have a bunch of number on my list on the phone I'm on now. But if not, it shouldn't be any problem because Skip's, the Skip's daughter, he's headed up the Skip Shockley Foundation, and because that's what bunch of them were staying at when they came up for the funeral. They were all headquartered over to their house. Skip's house, and so he won't be any problem. I could always go through our website. It's about time N.B.P.P.com, out of Sacramento, and track it through there. But yeah, it wouldn't be that difficult at all to touch base with him on that. I have so many irons in the fire, and I hadn't been in touch in a while. And with the ride, been sick, hadn't gotten down to Houston in a while. So, but I'm kind of waiting on this bullet train, that's supposed to be developing the run between Dallas and Houston in about 45 minutes. So, definitely looking forward to that.
Wow.
But yeah, the whole thing with the Shape Center, y'all know if you're familiar with that. Houston is one of the hub of activities down there, and the Black United Front with brother he did Kofi. Yeah, Kofi. Mm-hmm. Yeah, brother Kofi. And so, because he used to come up here more frequently to Pan Africa before all of the virus thing, but not. But yeah, so the brother at the Shape Center, I'm trying to think of his name too hard, but anyway, that's a whole nother thing. Anyway, I got a connection with that because I think his sister is married to a cousin of mine, and they never knew. I hadn't gotten down since I was able to find that out. So.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely love to be able to reach out, and if nothing else, sit down on a Zoom conversation and chop it up and see what more he can give us, because the Panther 48 War, myself and Brother Syke, one of our primary objectives is continuity of the struggle. There's this gap generationally between those who are involved, from one generation to the next. So one of the things we're hoping to do is to create some type of network so that the next generation doesn't have to go back and repeat all the same mistakes that we made again. So having you here and having others, and having, hopefully, I'm gonna claim it and say my cousin down there in Houston, and having them, you all, our elders, to tell us things, to give us this information, so that that my daughter and her daughter don't continue to make the same mistakes that we've made in the past. And so, kind of in that spirit of that light, I know I don't want to take up much more of your time. I know you've got things to do. Wars just getting back from an event there in San Diego, but I want to ask you, just in kind of wrapping up, if you could give us, from your vantage point, with your history, with what it is you've seen, heard about, the people you've met, the things that you've done and experienced within the movement, outside of the movement, proper or whatnot, what type of message would you want to leave for the next generation, for those that are watching this now, that are kind of have a little bit of that spark? Maybe they didn't come up having the background that kind of pushed them into this in an organic, natural type of thing, and they're just stumbling on it. What types of things can you tell them as an elder of ours, to I guess help motivate them, to clarify some things, to just kind of help them feed off of that and keep their motivation going for this?
Yeah, well, first thing I would want to say that you would have never been able to be a member of the Black Panther Party if you didn't like to read, because that was an ultimate requirement. That was a must. And so in this day and age, of course, technology can all be a wonderful thing, but the whole impersonal aspect of it is a problem. And so you got to be a hands-on kind of person, and you don't have to spend all your time on it, because of course, I was deemed, outcast basically in my household, just being a part of all of this. And so, I don't know any relatives close to my age that's been involved, to any extent in this type of a movement, other than, like I say, a couple of cousins that are, like I say, got to cousin that's the mayor of Boyce, Louisiana, and the mayor of Alexandria, Louisiana is my cousin. And so I've been able to track that doing the genealogy thing. And I've of course met the one in Louisiana a couple of times. And of course, when I was there in Louisiana, I know, the one that's in Boyce. So that kind of a thing, you really need to kind of get your hands on and do the personal research, to see where it's connected with. And a good example would be just tracking, say individuals in the hip hop generation that very popular, like the Tupac. Is usually what I utilize when I'm doing presentation to show the connection. How would you have known if you hadn't been involved? See, if I hadn't been involved, I would have never known the connection between Tupac, because that's all the name they were given at the time when we playing his, songs on the radio. They would mention him, Shakur.
Yeah.
So I learned the connection with he and Afeni. Then so she was part of the leadership in the New York chapter in Harlem. Then lo and behold, finding out Dr. Matulu Shakur, being connected with that, being married to the sister here out Bear Creek, and of course her son is, his father is Dr. Matulu. And so where's all the Tupac's gold records? Over here in Bear Creek in her living room. Her connection with the sister used to write for the morning news, Linda Jones. That's where they would hold a lot of their N.B.P.P Affair meetings at. And people were just awestruck, wouldn't believe that, these are Tupac's gold records. And what are you doing with his records on the board? Then they realized her name is Shakur also. And so just that kind of thing comes into play, when you're involved in this. And so, once you get lukewarm, just dabble in it a little bit, it'll take off. Because you'll see, a lot of problems you see you're faced with, observe how we dealt with them. A lot of mistakes that we made, of course, you have no way of knowing things in advance and how things will play out. Keep in mind now, the average age of a Panther back in the day was 19.
19.
How would we have all the sophistication to deal with sophisticated CIA, FBI, defense intelligence? All this was being thrown at us. Counterintelligence program, wiretapping, sending bogus letters. I said at a meeting at one of the Panther reunions in DC, wherein big man, they have several workshops going on simultaneously, so you had to pick and choose. So the sister and I, we decided to sit in on the women's workshop. And in that workshop with us also was big man. Now, the sister had come in from Tanzania, Peace Wife, Charlotte. Charlotte hadn't seen Kathleen Cleaver since Eldridge and them were in Algiers. And so she just stopped in the middle of her presentation and asked big man sitting in the audience, big man, did you send us a letter to Algiers? He said, hell no. So all these years later, this just now resolving this, with litigation. And so all that kind of dirty work has gone on, And so those are things you just kind of have to be on top of. By the way, when I mentioned dirty work, there's a book also you may want to get called Dirty Work, the CIA in Africa. That's a must. Also, Robert Allen's book, Black Awakening in Capitalist America. These are kind of primers to kind of get you started, the whole concept of how dirty, people thinking America was good at one time, then it went bad. It's been bad from the get-go.
Yeah.
So the whole Trail of Tears, making the indigenous people walk from Florida to Oklahoma, all the black towns in Oklahoma, they came into existence. Why? Because we weren't wanted in other places, so we were forced to, keep it all internal. But once we were taught in the corrupt school system, with all of the ice over there is colder and the grass is greener, we need to get rid of the Negro League. And we'll just let y'all have one person. Once y'all sign Jackie, we don't have to support ours anymore. We can go pay over here and see Jackie play and let ours die. And keep in mind, Negro League existed since 1960. So my whole Little League baseball career, was going on simultaneously while that league still was in existence. And just the players I heard of, people playing in baseball now with batting average like 260 something, they wouldn't even been let on the farm team, let alone playing in the serious league. And so the people that's not in the Hall of Fame, that's on the Negro League, like it's a crime against humanity. One catcher, everybody heard of Josh Gibson probably, home run king in the Negro League. Well, the brother that should be on that list with Josh in the Hall of Fame is Biz Mackey out of South Texas. His brother was so notorious, he could gun down base stealers in a squat position, never got up.
Wow.
Those are the kind of folks. So yeah, just, you can study this 24/7 and barely put a dent in it.
Yeah.
And of course, they broadcast on the internet Doc Ben's funeral live when it took place. The obituary is like about a 1/4 inch thick. And you could see on the first row there, because you know, Doc Ben was a member of the craft of Cyrus, Nile Valley. And generally that's a lot of stuff they don't make public. But at the funeral, they had a lot of the people that I knew sitting on the front row that, you know, had been initiated, that were members of the craft. We thought that was kind of interesting. So if you all may want to pull that up, you know, check it out. And a lot of videos with him and Dr. Clark, a lot of that entourage there. So yeah, the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilization, you know, is the hub that coordinated that trip that I went on in '87. But the crazy trip is an annual thing, you know, that would be beneficial if you had a mind of going to the continent. Just don't go over there as a tourist, you know, looking at the animals and, you know, go on safari to kill all the animals, you know, kind of a thing. Oh, and by the way, Africa does not have tigers, so if you go there looking for tigers, you won't find them.
Yeah, I know a lot of people think that. Well, again, brother, I can't stress to you how much of an honor it's been. You know, like I said at the beginning, visiting your home that time, and I know you don't remember me, but
when you mentioned Gary, are you talking about Gary who's been in Cobra?
Gary Brown, yes, I believe he was part.
Him and Arissa.
Yes, his wife.
Gary had me do a presentation at the church in North Dallas.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, the African Origin Civilization.
Oh, nice. I haven't talked to Gary in years. But yeah, I came up at the University of North Texas through an organization called Ujima, which is where I met Gary. And that kind of was my university, a revolutionary university type thing. But yeah, I mean that I visited with him in your home, and like I said, seeing all the information that you had just clicked something in the back of my head. And before I knew it, War had drafted me in as a Minister of Information in New Black Panther Party. So I always kind of kept that image in the back of my head of just, if nothing else, collect the information, get out as much as you can, but always take the information that you get and hold on to it. So you've always kind of been that template in the back of my head. So, I mean, I want to thank you for your time, the information you've given. You've messed up my paradigm now with the whole.
It had to be Gary. If you don't Gary, I know.
Yeah, oh yeah, I'm hitting Arissa, yeah, definitely. But I mean, just, you know, the idea that the leadership in Dallas was an agent, and you know my cousin that I don't, you know, which kind of doesn't surprise me. But again, I want to thank you for sharing your time, your information, your energy, and all of that. And with all that you've got, I can see us, you know, revisiting and talking about some of those tangents and some of those, you know, where you said, you know, a couple of times, well, that's another story. That's probably a direction we need to go at some point in time and talk about that. So I can see us trying to get back together and having some more of these conversations, because this has been very informative.